was, yeah, because we were working on this film for 4 years. So a couple years into it, we realized, okay, we're going to make this in 3D. And so we'd already had a lot of it designed, but then, but we realized that a lot of it will look great in 3D. There's some of the experience that would be like really fun.
Well, for one thing, and one thing I think we got to quickly, I was racing through the presentation this morning, I apologize for that, but the idea that you want to keep your point of interest, you know, the story point at the screen depth, where the left and right eye images overlap, I think that's an important one. So you're essentially watching a 2D movie with the added benefit of all this depth around it, be they foreground set dressing objects or a deeply recessed background. So if you're able to do that, it helps in editorial cuts. As you go from shot A to shot B, you're not asking the audience to dramatically adjust in Z depth. They're right around each other. And the fact that, you know, eye fatigue and discomfort really happens when you're separating that point of convergence from that point of focus. And so that's one thing that I think we pay close attention to that films of the past probably didn't. Another thing that we do is, you know, our eyes are all about 2.25 inches apart. And what that does is when you're converging on an object like that, the background is wildly diverged, you know, to the point where if I looked up and that stayed that diverged, it would be incredibly painful, and my eyes would have to go wall-eyed to make those images fuse. So what we do is we take that 2.25 inch offset and we actually shrink it down oftentimes so that the audience can look around the entire frame whenever they would like to. And so I think we leave a little depth on the table, so to speak, by doing that, but we make it a very comfortable frame to view, you know, top to bottom, left to right. So that's just a choice we make to allow the viewer that freedom to look around with confidence that they're not going to encounter something that's really challenging to view.
I just think it's another tool a filmmaker can use, and I think that I don't think it's just like any tool. It's not better or worse. I think it's. I think a lot of people. It'll be fun for a lot of people to go to IMAX and to go to regular 3D and see this film because you saw how much detail we put into this thing, and it looks insanely great when it's up on that super high-res screen. But it also plays wonderfully in the regular 2D.
One thing that comes to mind is like editorial length, like length of shots. Oftentimes you'll have a 3D shot that's really beautiful and engrossing, and you'll want to spend more time there. Then in a 2D cut, you might quickly move on because you want to continue telling the story. So I think if you see a lot of 3D movies, you'll have a lot of like flying camera shots and really long takes, you know, and that's something that works really well in 3D, where in 2D you might kind of be scratching your head, I wonder why the shot's going on so long. So when we're faced with choices like that, it'll depend on the movie, but we're largely making a traditional choice, or like a 2D choice, because, you know, I think over the life of these films, more people will probably see them in 2D, although as 3D in the home grows, that may change. And so those are differences you might make for 3D. One thing that we have done in Toy Story 3 is we've done some subtle reframings of shots. One thing that kind of bites you in 3D is when a camera is really low to the ground, because then you have to account for those grass blades in the foreground, which means I can put those so far in the audience, but then my screen plane has to be here, and the character that I want to look at is then deeply recessed and flat, all because I have to account for this grass. And so I've asked Lee if I can just raise cameras up, you know, every now and then for a slight reframing to get more depth spread across the whole shot instead of just accounting for that extreme foreground stuff. So those are changes we're making. I've just taken out foreground objects for the 3D version. They're, you know, maybe dandelions that are set dressing, and I'll just turn them off so that I can spread more depth around, and we don't have to have this dandelion that's, you know, way out in the audience. Depth of field is another change. You know, a shallow depth of field where a lot is out of focus, and there's a, you know, shallow plane over the character that you're interested in. That's great in 2D, and it really directs your eye where the director wants it to go. But in 3D, those out of focus elements actually kind of draw your eye because you're trying to make sense of them. So, you know, foreground head and shoulder shot, for instance, you're looking down at a character and there's a head and shoulder there, and if it's really blown out, you actually kind of glance over there and try to make sense of what looks like a ghost or something in front of you. So we've done a lot of changes there for the 3D version where I've just tamped down that depth of field a little bit. in essence, broadening the depth of field. So it's not so shallow, so it's a little broader so that foreground object won't be quite so aggressively blurry. So those are some of the changes we're making now. It's challenging. It's really challenging. And Toy Story 3 looks great because a lot of the lighting is very subtle and supple, and there's actually like a lighting fall off between a character's nose and the back of their head, so you're getting that depth cue as well as the 3D cue. So a lot of it works really well. Where films don't work as well is when it's really brightly lit, and everything sort of has an even sheen of light across it. Then characters can feel very much like cards, you know, in layers. That combined with the fact that as objects are farther and farther from you, we see them with less and less depth difference, so to speak. We're all essentially a cyclops after about 100 yards. There's no more difference between what our left and right eyes are seeing. And so if you have a shot with a foreground character and there's no real connective tissue, as we call it, or objects that lead your eye to the vanishing point, that background will just look flat. You know, when I look over at those offices, they just look flat. There's no real difference between those art cases and then the kitchen behind it. And so, yeah, you know, if you were solely authoring a movie for 3D, you would try to avoid shots like that. But, you know, we're not in that place yet where we're authoring every shot to make the 3D work. We're doing it more traditionally. And so there are going to be some shots where, try as you might as a 3D team, they're going to feel a little cardy or a little flatter than you might like. I think it comes down to the skill and budget that's applied to the conversion. You know, I don't necessarily think 2D to 3D conversion can't work. I've seen examples where it works quite well and serves a purpose much like our 3D films do, where it feels more engrossing, more involving, and more interesting visually. So given the right time and skill, I think that 2D conversions can be really great, really rewarding. I think we're going to see a lot of them, so we have to hope that people figure it out and do a good job.
John lasted, I'm sure that Andrew told you, John's always been into 3D. He did his short films in 3D, and we did all these tests on Toy Story and Toy Story 2 in IMAX 3D to see if it would work. So John's always been a great enthusiast. The other filmmakers have varied levels of enthusiasm for it, and mostly a lot of it was the limitations of the technology. I think now the technology has gotten to a place where you can have a 3D experience fairly unencumbered. I mean, the glasses are a pain in the neck, but the experience is great, and you don't get headaches, and it enhances some of the storytelling. But in terms of making the movie, one of the great things is that Lee came from the live action world. When he came to us in 1994, he came from the live action world, and so he was part of one of the pioneers of this medium, and he staged everything with a lot of depth. So when we went to re-render Toy Story 1 and 2, all we had to do is put another camera in there and render that other eye, and it came out pretty seamlessly, pretty perfectly. We didn't know it was going to, but it did. And so that informed us that if we just made the film with the same kind of depth, the same kind of eye for staging, that when we put the other camera in there, it would turn out perfectly, which it has been. So anyway, it's been pretty easy, and it's pretty cool. And some of the shots, it's really fun to see some of the separation. You saw some of Lotso's backstory, like Lotso looking through the window, and that's just great. You see the drops rolling down, and he's back here, and there's some cool storytelling aspects to it.
I think that we're pretty much assured now of a 3D genre, just like you might have an action film genre or a horror movie genre. I can't imagine that it's going to completely go away. Whether it spreads itself into, you know, the next romantic comedy or into Meryl Streep drama or something, that certainly remains to be seen. I know that there's a lot of sporting events coming our way in 3D. There are going to be increased concerts. So it's hard to imagine it going away, frankly. But whether it's in every piece of filmed entertainment, I don't know. We'll have to see.